February 17th, 1945. 3:47 hours. Somewhere in the Hürtgen forest, Germany. Staff Sergeant Robert Bobby Castellano crouches in a foxhole that reeks of cordite and frozen earth, watching his breath crystallize in the pre-dawn darkness. He's 23 years old, from Brooklyn, and he's been fighting in this godforsaken forest for 11 days straight. The Thompson submachine gun in his hands feels familiar. He's carried one since Normandy. But tonight, something's different. Tonight, he's holding something the Wehrmacht has never seen before. The weapon weighs nearly 18 pounds, almost double his standard Thompson. Where there should be one barrel, there are two, stacked vertically, each connected to separate 30-round stick magazines. The armorer back at battalion called it the Twin Thompson, but the official designation stamped on the receiver reads M1A1 dual configuration. Bobby doesn't care about names. He cares that when the Germans come, and they will come, he can put 400 rounds per minute downrange instead of 700. Through the trees, he hears it. The distinctive clanking of tank tracks. The guttural shouts in German. They're forming up for another assault, trying to retake this miserable slice of frozen hell before dawn. Bobby checks both magazines. Full, both bolts, chambered. His hands are shaking, but not from the cold. He's about to find out if this ungodly contraption works as advertised, or if he's just carrying extra weight to his grave. By February 1945, American forces had been bleeding in the Hürtgen forest for over 4 months. The forest, a 50-square-mile death trap of dense pine, steep ravines, and prepared German defenses, had already consumed the 9th Infantry Division, the 28th Infantry Division, and parts of the 4th and 83rd. Casualty rates reached 71% in some rifle companies. Men who survived Normandy and the Ardennes were being shredded by an enemy they couldn't see, fighting at ranges so close that grenades were more common than rifle fire. The problem was simple and deadly. Close-quarters forest combat demanded sustained, suppressive firepower, but the weapons available couldn't deliver it. The M1 Garand, America's primary rifle, held 8 rounds and required precise aim. Impossible when you're firing at muzzle flashes through pine branches at 15 yards. The Browning automatic rifle could lay down automatic fire, but at 20 pounds with a 20-round magazine, it was too heavy for the aggressive movement forest combat required. The Thompson submachine gun should have been perfect. Since 1942, over 1.5 million M1A1 Thompsons had been produced. Every infantry squad had at least one, sometimes two. At 700 rounds per minute, it could sweep a trench or clear a bunker. But in sustained firefights, the kind that lasted hours in the Hürtgen, soldiers faced a critical limitation. The Thompson's 30-round stick magazines emptied in 2.6 seconds of continuous fire. In the time it took to drop an empty magazine, just grab a fresh one from your pouch, insert it, and chamber a round, you were defenseless for 4 to 5 seconds. In the Hürtgen forest, 5 seconds got you killed. Between September 1944 and February 1945, the U.S. First Army reported 33,000 casualties in the forest. German after-action reports noted that American infantry assaults consistently faltered during magazine changes. Wehrmacht defenders in fortified positions could predict the pause, time their counterfire, and cut down advancing soldiers during the reload cycle. The 28th Infantry Division alone lost 6,184 men in just 10 days of fighting in November 1944, the highest division casualty rate of the entire war. Frontline officers began sending desperate requests back to ordnance units. They needed sustained firepower. They needed to suppress German positions, long enough for riflemen to maneuver. They needed to break the reload and die cycle that was butchering infantry squads. Standard procurement channels couldn't help. Developing a new weapon system took years. Testing, evaluation, production tooling. The bureaucracy moved at peacetime speed, while men died at wartime rates. But 150 miles behind the lines, at the 7th Army Ordnance Battalion Depot near Liège, Belgium, a 31-year-old technical sergeant named James Watkins had an idea that would bypass every regulation in the manual. If one Thompson fired 700 rounds per minute, what if you mounted two together? If you want to see how American ingenuity turned desperation into the most devastating close-quarters weapon of World War II, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story gets wild. Back to Bobby Castellano. Technical Sergeant James Watkins had spent 8 years before the war as a machinist at Colt's Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company in Hartford, Connecticut. He knew the M1A1 Thompson intimately, had helped tool the production line that stamped out thousands per month. When the requests started filtering back from the Hürtgen for more sustained firepower, Watkins saw a solution that seemed almost too simple. The Thompson's receiver was solid steel, over-engineered by John Thompson's original 1921 design standards. The bolt carrier system was robust enough to handle sustained fire well beyond normal combat conditions. The barrel attachment system used a simple threaded collar. Watkins realized you could stack two complete Thompson firing systems together, sharing a single stock and grip but operating independently, and the weapon would still be lighter than a .30 caliber machine gun. Between December 15 and December 28, 1944, working with 3 other ordnance specialists, Watkins built the first prototype. They started with 2 M1A1 receivers, removed the stocks from both, and fabricated a custom dual mounting frame from salvaged aircraft aluminum. The 2 barrels were positioned vertically, exactly 3.2 inches apart, center to center. Each retained its own bolt, firing pin, and magazine well. Trigger mechanism was the revolutionary part. Watkins designed a linked system that fired both weapons simultaneously, alternating which barrel fired first with each trigger pull to distribute barrel heat. The prototype weighed 17.8 pounds empty, 23.4 pounds with both 30-round magazines loaded. For comparison, the bar weighed 19.4 pounds loaded. But where the bar gave you 20 rounds of .30-06, the twin Thompson delivered 60 rounds of .45 ACP, and you could reload one magazine while still firing from the other. The cyclic rate was devastating. With both barrels firing, the weapon achieved 1,400 rounds per minute, exactly double a standard Thompson. But the real genius was in the sustained fire capability. A trained operator could maintain continuous fire for 8.6 seconds by alternating magazines. Empty the top, keep firing from the bottom while reloading the top, then reverse. In theoretical terms, you could maintain suppressive fire indefinitely as long as ammunition held out. On January 3, 1945, Watkins demonstrated the prototype for Colonel Daniel Hartmann, commanding officer of V Corps Ordnance. They set up 20 wooden targets representing German infantry at 25 yards, standard forest engagement distance. Watkins loaded both magazines, flipped the selector to automatic, and pressed the trigger. The sound wasn't the familiar brrrrap of a Thompson. It was deeper, more sustained, a continuous roar that shredded all 20 targets in 4.2 seconds. The wood didn't just splinter, it disintegrated. Fragments flew 20 feet behind the target line. Colonel Hartmann authorized immediate production of 50 units. The official designation was M1A1 submachine gun, dual configuration, modified. Ordnance Corps documentation listed it as T-48 experimental. But when the first units reached frontline troops in late January 1945, soldiers had their own names. The 9th Infantry Division called them Double Trouble. The 78th Infantry Division used Brooklyn Specials, assuming they'd been built in New York. The Germans called them Doppeltod, Double Death. February 17th, 1945. 4:12 hours, Bobby Castellano's foxhole. The German assault begins with artillery. 3 ranging shots that explode 80 yards to Bobby's left. Then a full barrage that turns the forest into a shrieking nightmare of airbursts and splintering pine. He huddles at the bottom of his hole, the twin Thompson pressed against his chest, counting seconds between impacts. 27 shells in 40 seconds. They're bracketing the American line, walking the fire forward. The barrage stops at 4:19 hours. In the ringing silence, Bobby hears the first screams. Hurrah! 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 Not German Wehrmacht, Waffen-SS. Worse. He risks a look over the rim. 60 yards out, maybe 70, gray shapes materialize from the pre-dawn murk. They're moving fast, 20 or 30 of them, MP-40s chattering, trying to close the distance before American rifles can find their range. The GI-2, Bobby's left, Private Miller from Chicago, fires his Garand. 8 shots, the distinctive ping of the empty clip ejecting. He ducks to reload. The Germans are at 50 yards. Bobby has never fired the twin Thompson in combat. Has only test-fired it once, 3 days ago, when the armorer handed it to him with a grin and said, "Don't let go of this thing or it'll climb to heaven." 40 rounds into a dirt berm. The recoil was brutal, the muzzle rise insane, but the targets, 3 man-sized logs at 25 yards, had been sawed in half. 45 yards now. He can see their faces, young faces, hard faces. One of them spots his muzzle, shouts something, brings his MP-40 around. Bobby stands up, braces the twin Thompson against his shoulder, aims at the center of the German formation, and squeezes. The weapon explodes to life. Not the controlled bursts he learned on the standard Thompson. This is a sustained roar, a physical force that hammers his shoulder and tries to rip the gun upward. The tracers, every 5th round from each barrel, create a double stream of fire that looks like a glowing ladder leading into the German line. The effect is immediate and catastrophic. The first German hit takes 3 rounds center mass and goes down hard. The man behind him catches 4 rounds before he can even turn. Bobby's training takes over. Short sweeps, left to right, 4-second bursts. The top magazine empties first. He keeps the trigger down. The bottom barrel keeps firing while his left hand drops the spent mag, grabs a fresh one from his pouch, slams it home. Never stops firing. Not for 1 second. The German assault simply disintegrates. Men dive for cover, scramble backward, return fire wildly at a target they can't pin down because the muzzle flash comes from 2 barrels, and the volume of fire makes them think they're facing a machine gun nest. Bobby empties the second magazine, 30 rounds in 3.8 seconds, drops it, keeps firing from the reloaded top magazine. By 4:21 hours, less than 2 minutes after the Germans emerged from the trees, 7 are confirmed dead. At least 4 more hit and dragging themselves back toward their lines. The rest have melted back into the forest. Bobby stops firing. His ears are ringing so badly he can't hear Miller shouting beside him. His shoulder feels like he's been kicked by a mule. The barrels are smoking, heat shimmer visible, even in the darkness. He's burned through 90 rounds, 3 full magazines. Miller is staring at him, then at the twin Thompson, then back at Bobby. What in the holy hell is that thing? Bobby doesn't answer. He's reloading, hands shaking, adrenaline making his fingers clumsy. Because he can hear more shouting in German. They're regrouping. They're coming again. And now Bobby knows exactly what this weapon can do. The second assault hits at 4:34 hours. This time the Germans know what they're facing. They've pulled back and brought up an MG-42, trying to suppress Bobby's position with 200 rounds per minute of 7.92mm Fury. Bobby hunkers down, waits for the MG-42 to pause for a barrel change. The instant the German gun goes quiet, he's up, both magazines fresh, finger on the trigger. The German machine gun team, 3 men at 40 yards, never gets the barrel changed. Bobby walks the double stream of fire across their position, 1,400 rounds per minute chewing through the logs they're using for cover. One man tries to run, catches 6 rounds before he makes 3 steps. By 5:05 hours, when full daylight breaks, the Germans have pulled back 200 yards. They leave behind 17 confirmed dead, and what Bobby will later learn from intelligence reports as a panicked radio transmission. Contact broken. American position has heavy machine gun. Require armor support. They think he has a .30 cal. They have no idea it's one man with a modified submachine gun. Battalion estimates Bobby fired 340 rounds in the engagement. Standard Thompson doctrine. Recommended 2 to 3 round bursts. Bobby averaged sustained bursts of 25 to 30 rounds, made possible only by the continuous fire capability of the dual magazine system. The casualty ratio tells the story. Bobby's platoon, 31 men, suffers 3 wounded, none killed. The attacking German force, estimated at 45 to 50 Waffen-SS, loses 17 confirmed dead, estimated 12 to 15 wounded. That's a 58% casualty rate against a 9.7% casualty rate. The Twin Thompson has proven itself in the most brutal testing ground imaginable. News of the Hürtgen engagement spread through V Corps within 48 hours. By February 20th, 1945, Colonel Hartmann had requests for 127 Twin Thompsons from 7 different divisions. The 7th Army Ordnance Battalion went into maximum production mode, running 3 shifts, fabricating the dual mounting frames from salvaged aircraft components and damaged armored vehicle plating. Between February 15th and March 28th, 1945, the Ordnance Unit produced 183 Twin Thompsons. Each required approximately 16 hours of skilled machine work, mainly in fabricating the linking trigger mechanism and the mounting frame. Every unit was hand-fitted, hand-tested, and hand-delivered to frontline units by ordnance specialists, who provided 30 minutes of instruction on loading, firing, and field maintenance. The weapons were distributed according to tactical necessity. Priority went to units engaged in urban combat and close-quarters forest fighting. The 9th Infantry Division received 42 units. The 78th Infantry Division got 37. The 1st Infantry Division, preparing for the Rhine crossing, received 28. Each division's intelligence section noted the same pattern. German forces showed marked reluctance to press assaults against positions known to contain the dual weapons. Enemy response came in captured documents and interrogation reports. A Waffen-SS tactical bulletin, dated March 3, 1945, warned of Amerikanische Doppelwaffe, American double weapon, and advised that positions suspected of containing them should be bypassed or engaged with armor support. A captured Wehrmacht lieutenant from the 12th Volksgrenadier Division, interrogated on March 15th, described the weapon as psychologically devastating and noted that his men refused to advance against positions where they'd observed the distinctive double muzzle flash. The logistics were challenging. Each twin Thompson required 60 rounds of 45 ACP ammunition to fully load, compared to 30 for a standard Thompson. Ammunition resupply became critical. Infantry companies carrying 4 twin Thompsons needed an additional 240 rounds per combat load beyond standard allocation. Battalion S4 officers reported ammunition expenditure rates 340% higher in units employing the weapons. Maintenance posed unique problems. The dual trigger linkage was the failure point. After approximately 800 and 900 rounds, the connecting pins showed, where that caused timing issues between the two firing systems. Ordnance specialists developed a field modification using captured German spring steel, which extended the service life to roughly 1,400 rounds before requiring depot-level maintenance. Operational employment evolved rapidly. Initial doctrine treated the twin Thompson as a defensive weapon, but by mid-March, assault platoons began using them for offensive operations. The 9th Infantry Division developed suppression teams, 2 men with twin Thompsons providing continuous covering fire while rifle squads maneuvered. After-action reports from the Remagen bridgehead crossing showed that these teams could suppress German positions up to 70 yards away for sustained periods, allowing infantry to advance across open ground that would have been suicidal under standard fire support. The psychological impact exceeded tactical expectations. German prisoners consistently overestimated American strength in engagements involving twin Thompsons. One captured German company commander, questioned after the March 24th Rhine crossing, reported facing multiple machine gun positions, when, in fact, he'd engaged a single infantry platoon with 2 twin Thompsons. The volume and sustained nature of the fire created the impression of prepared defensive positions rather than mobile infantry weapons. Production limitations prevented wider deployment. The 7th Army Ordnance Battalion could produce, at maximum capacity, approximately 12 units per day. Demand far exceeded this rate. By April 1945, there was a waiting list of 47 divisions requesting allocation. The European Theater of Operations Headquarters considered establishing a dedicated production facility in Paris, but the rapid advance into Germany and the approaching end of the war made this impractical. Enemy attempts to copy the design proved unsuccessful. German intelligence recovered 2 twin Thompsons from overrun American positions, one near Remagen on March 18th, another during the final Wehrmacht counterattack in the Ruhr Pocket on April 5th. German ordnance evaluation reports, captured after the war, noted that while the concept was sound, Germany lacked both the raw materials and the manufacturing capacity to produce similar weapons. The report recommended development of a dual-barrel MP40 variant, but the project never proceeded beyond preliminary drawings. The engineering of the twin Thompson was simultaneously brilliant and primitive, battlefield necessity married to machine shop improvisation. The core innovation lay in the trigger linking mechanism, a deceptively simple system that synchronized 2 independent firearms into a single weapon. Each Thompson firing system operated on John Thompson's original delayed blowback design. When you pulled the trigger, the firing pin struck the primer, igniting the 45 ACP cartridge. The expanding gases drove the 230-grain bullet down the barrel at roughly 920 feet per second. while simultaneously driving the bolt backward against the force of the recoil spring. The bolt traveled approximately 3.8 inches, extracting and ejecting the spent casing, then returned forward under spring pressure, stripping a fresh round from the magazine and chambering it. In the twin Thompson, Watkins's trigger linkage ensured both firing systems activated within the 0.03 seconds of each other, essentially simultaneous. The linkage consisted of two hardened steel bars connected to a central pivot, transferring force from the single trigger to both sears. The alternating barrel system worked through a cam mechanism that delayed one firing pin by approximately 0.043 seconds, just enough to prevent both barrels from firing the exact same instant, which would have created uncontrollable recoil and potentially damaged the mounting frame. The practical result, when you held the trigger down, the weapon fired barrel 1, barrel 2, barrel 1, barrel 2 in rapid succession. The combined cyclic rate reached 1,400 rounds per minute, but each individual barrel fired at the standard Thompson rate of 700 rounds per minute. This distribution of fire across two barrels solved the heat management problem that limited sustained automatic fire. Ballistically, the weapon was devastating within its effective range. The 45 ACP cartridge, with its 230-grain bullet and subsonic velocity, delivered tremendous stopping power at close range. Two bullets arriving within 0.043 seconds created what combat reports described as immediate incapacitation. Enemy soldiers hit with dual rounds showed massive trauma. The second bullet often struck within 2 inches of the first, effectively doubling the wound cavity. Effective range remained the Thompson's traditional 50-100 yards, though accuracy degraded significantly beyond 40 yards due to muzzle rise. The recoil impulse was severe. Approximately 48 pounds of force with both barrels firing, compared to 24 pounds for a standard Thompson. Operators learned to lean heavily into the weapon, using their body weight to counteract the upward climb. Standing fire was nearly impossible. The weapon was most effective fired from a prone position or braced against solid cover. The dual magazine system created both advantages and complications. The staggered magazine placement, top and bottom, separated by 3.2 inches, meant you could reload one while firing from the other, maintaining continuous fire. However, the magazines weren't interchangeable in position. The top magazine had a modified follower spring to prevent feeding issues when mounted upside down. In combat, this meant operators needed to track which magazine went where, a cognitive load that sometimes led to feeding failures when exhausted soldiers inserted magazines incorrectly. Maintenance requirements exceeded standard Thompson specifications by a factor of 3. The linking mechanism required daily cleaning and lubrication. The mounting frame, fabricated from aluminum, showed stress cracks after sustained use, typically after 2,000–2,500 rounds fired. Field armorers learned to inspect the frame attachment points before each mission, replacing cracked frames when possible, reinforcing them with wire wrapping when replacement parts were unavailable. Ammunition consumption was the weapon's greatest limitation. A standard infantry rifleman carried 80 rounds for his M1 Garand. A Thompson gunner carried 150 rounds in 5 30-round magazines. A twin Thompson operator needed 300 rounds minimum, 10 magazines, to maintain the weapon's suppressive fire advantage. This translated to an additional 18 pounds of carried weight beyond the weapon itself. In practice, twin Thompson operators often worked in two-man teams, the gunner and an ammunition carrier who held reserve magazines. The weapon's greatest weakness was also its strength. The same sustained fire capability that devastated enemy formations also advertised the shooter's position. German observers quickly learned to identify twin Thompson positions by the distinctive double muzzle flash and sustained fire signature. Counter-battery fire and mortar strikes frequently targeted these positions within minutes of engagement. Operational doctrine evolved to require twin Thompson operators to displace immediately after sustained fire, shoot, move, and shoot again from a different position. Comparison to enemy weapons highlighted both advantages and limitations. The German MG-42, with its wang 200 rounds per minute cyclic rate and belt-fed ammunition system, provided superior sustained fire at longer ranges. However, the MG-42 required a three-man crew, weighed 25.5 pounds without ammunition, and needed a prepared position or bipod for effective fire. The twin Thompson, operated by a single soldier, could provide comparable suppressive fire for short periods while remaining mobile enough for offensive operations. The Soviet PPSH-41, with its 71-round drum magazine, offered sustained fire from a single weapon, but its 7.62 Wabwan 25mm cartridge lacked the 45 ACP's stopping power. German soldiers who survived engagements against both weapons, documented in post-war interviews, consistently rated the twin Thompson as more immediately lethal, noting that soldiers hit by 45 ACP fire went down and stayed down. The twin Thompson's combat life was brief, February through May 1945, just over 3 months. Production ceased on May 8, 1945, with Germany's surrender. Total documented production, 183 units. Total confirmed combat deployments, 168 units. 15 units remained in ordnance depots, never issued. The post-war disposition of these weapons remains one of the more intriguing mysteries of military materiel tracking. Standard procedure required experimental weapons to be either returned to Aberdeen, proving ground for evaluation, or destroyed to prevent unauthorized duplication. Of the 183 twin Thompsons produced, Army records account for only 47. On June 15, 1945, the European Theater Ordnance Command issued Technical Order 45R12, classifying the twin Thompson as experimental materiel, restricted, and ordering all units to be collected and shipped to the United States for analysis. By September 1945, only 23 units had been recovered. An additional 24 were reported destroyed in combat or lost during the final German collapse. The remaining 136 units simply vanished from official records. Declassified Army intelligence documents from 1946 suggest at least some of the weapons were deliberately retained by frontline units or individual soldiers. One document, dated August 3, 1946, notes that enlisted personnel may have retained modified M1A1 weapons as war trophies despite orders to the contrary. Another reference from a 1947 War Department investigation into missing ordnance mentions approximately 43 dual configuration submachine guns unaccounted for, presumed taken as souvenirs. The weapons that did reach Aberdeen proving ground underwent extensive evaluation between July and November 1945. The technical report, declassified in 1979, reached mixed conclusions. The evaluators acknowledged the weapon's exceptional suppressive fire capability in close-quarters combat, but noted excessive weight, ammunition consumption, and maintenance requirements unsuitable for standardization. The report recommended against adoption as a standard infantry weapon, instead suggesting that the fire support role should be filled by light machine guns and the newly developed M3 grease gun. The concept itself, however, influenced post-war small arms development. Soviet weapons designers who gained access to at least 2 captured twin Thompsons through unclear channels incorporated elements of the dual-firing system into experimental assault rifle designs. The TKB-059, a triple-barrel assault rifle prototype developed in the 1960s, used a similar alternating fire mechanism, though it never entered production. American Special Operations Forces revisited the concept during Vietnam. Between 1967 and 1968, Naval Special Warfare Group evaluated a dual-barrel M16 variant, designated the XM177E3. The weapon showed promising results in trials, but suffered from the same limitations that had plagued the Twin Thompson: excessive weight and ammunition consumption. The project was canceled in favor of the M60 machine gun for sustained fire support. The Twin Thompson's true legacy lies in its demonstration of battlefield innovation's speed and effectiveness. From concept to combat deployment in just 43 days, a timeline that would have been impossible through standard procurement channels. Technical Sergeant James Watkins received the Bronze Star for his design work, though the citation described it vaguely as meritorious achievement in support of combat operations, without mentioning the specific weapon system. The official history of the weapon remained classified until 1979, when the Army declassified the Aberdeen Proving Ground Evaluation Report. Even then, public knowledge remained limited. The weapon appeared in no official Army histories of World War II, merited no mention in standard reference works on American small arms, and was absent from the vast majority of veteran memoirs and unit histories. This obscurity was partially by design. Post-war Army leadership, focused on standardization and conventional procurement, had little interest in publicizing weapons that had bypassed normal acquisition procedures. The Twin Thompson represented a form of innovation, field modification driven by tactical necessity, that challenged the ordnance establishment's authority over weapons development. Bobby Castellano survived the Hürtgen forest, survived the Rhine crossing, survived the final push into Germany. He carried the Twin Thompson through all of it, the same weapon, serial number T48-037, until May 4, 1945, when his company commander ordered all experimental weapons turned in for shipment to the rear. Bobby never saw it again. He returned to Brooklyn in November 1945, took a job with his father's plumbing business, married his high school sweetheart, and for 34 years never mentioned the weapon to anyone outside his veterans group. When he finally talked about it in a 1979 interview with a military history researcher, he described it simply: "The thing was a monster to carry and a monster to fire, but it kept me alive when nothing else would have." Technical Sergeant James Watkins returned to Colt's Manufacturing after the war, worked as a senior machinist until his retirement in 1972. He received the Bronze Star for his design work, but was prohibited by Army classification orders from discussing the specifics. The restriction was lifted in 1979. But by then, Watkins was 76 years old and suffering from advanced dementia. He died in 1981 without ever publicly discussing his creation in detail. Of the estimated 2,000 to 300 American soldiers who used Twin Thompsons in combat, fewer than 300 are confirmed alive as of this recording. Their memories of the weapon are remarkably consistent: heavy, brutal, maintenance-intensive, and absolutely devastating at close range. Several veterans described it as the weapon that evened the odds when nothing else could. The weapon's classification until 1979 meant an entire generation of military historians missed its significance. It appears in no major reference works published before 1985. Even today, it occupies a footnote position in small arms history, a curiosity, an improvisation, a desperate measure for desperate times. But for the men who carried it through the Hürtgen forest, across the Rhine, into the heart of Germany during those final brutal months of the war, the Twin Thompson was something more. It was proof that American ingenuity, American manufacturing skill, and American determination to protect their own could overcome any obstacle, bypass any bureaucracy, and create solutions when solutions seemed impossible. The Germans called it Doppeltod, double death. The men who carried it called it a lifesaver. This weapon saved lives through innovation born from necessity. If this story moved you, hit that like button to honor the soldiers who carried these experimental weapons into combat and the engineers who built them in makeshift workshops behind the lines. Subscribe and ring that notification bell. We bring you the untold stories of battlefield innovation every week, the weapons and tactics that never made it into official histories, but changed the course of battles and saved countless lives. Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? Did anyone in your family serve in the European theater during World War II? Do you know stories of battlefield modifications or improvised weapons? Share them. These stories deserve to be remembered, and your family service deserves to be honored. To Staff Sergeant Bobby Castellano, Technical Sergeant James Watkins, and all the soldiers who proved that American innovation knows no limits when lives are on the line, we remember. We honor your service. We tell your stories. Because some histories are too important to remain classified forever.